이번에는 세 번째 발표 넬리 신님께서 함께해 주시겠는데요. 오늘 현장에 함께하고 계시죠? 전 캐나다 연방 하원 의원이십니다. 토론토에서 고등학교 교사와 선교사로 활동을 하시다가 2019년부터 작년까지 2021년까지 캐나다 연방 하원 의원으로 활동을 하셨습니다. 어떤 이야기들을 나눠주실지 좀 궁금한데요. 여러분 넬리 신 의원님을 따뜻한 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
감사합니다. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, and distinguished guests. I'd like to begin by thanking the Overseas Koreans Foundation and President Mr. Kim for your support of this event this week, and also for the Overseas Korean Politicians Council. We are very indebted to be able to gather this week. I'd like to give you a brief background of what I have here is just an outline of some of the things I will try to cover in the next little while, but I'd like to begin with a little context of how I've put together my thoughts on this topic. I was a high school teacher for 7 years, and then I was a missionary after that for another 7, and so my exposure before politics was very much about the human condition and brokenness and broken societies. I spend a lot of time listening to people's stories in faith-based counseling about abuse, trauma. So the lenses that I'm using for this talk today is from that psychological soul care perspective. And one of the things that, it was a journey for me as well to go through this exercise, and I realized, wow, politics really needs a makeover. I'll just leave it at that. So I truly am blessed to live in Canada. It's a very peaceful and compassionate nation that is welcoming to immigrants and responsive to the needs of the marginalized, disenfranchised, and we're founded on the principles of human dignity, prosperity, freedom and justice, and these values really are what provide fertile soil for peace and prosperity to flourish. It was therefore an honor for me when I served last term as the first Korean-Canadian member of Canada's Parliament. What amazes me about Korea's story is her resilience and unquenchable passion to rise from the ashes of a history marked by oppression and division to now becoming the prosperous country we see today. And resilience and passion is in each of us because we have that Korean spirit. And none of us would be here today if we didn't have that persevering passion and resilience. But we also carry in our souls the burden of a divided Korea. And our parents taught it to us. And as we just heard our colleague from Germany, the world continues to take note that while the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, Korea still remains divided. But our sense of grief and deferred hope of reunification should propel us into championing peace wherever we go, because we have that sensibility. So with the Korean pioneering spirit and a little divine intervention, peace can be restored if we put our minds and hearts to it. And that is if we are willing to start walking in the paradigm of peace, healing, and restoration. What I'm discussing today really is about a shift in paradigm. So it is important, therefore, for all of us here to take care of our souls, because self-care really is the first step to a paradigm of peace, healing, and restoration. Now, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. Everyone's familiar, I'm assuming, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm not going to review it, but it's sort of integrated in what I have to share now. If we want to bring peace into the world, we cannot turn our faces from the plight of poverty, abuse, mental health challenges, homelessness, crime, and violence in our own backyards, nor can we continue slapping Band-Aids onto these long-standing problems. We need to understand the entire social, economic ecosystem of society and implement social innovation that covers a continuum of support for needs from roots to restoration. And that is what is going to break vicious cycles. And that's what I saw on the front lines when I was ministering, caring for people from broken backgrounds. Prevention is a much more effective strategy to bring stability to a nation than waiting until unresolved problems create crisis. I say stabilizing the home front here. Sorry, I have to move on to the next slide. In the context that if we want to bring dialogue and make an impact for world peace, we have to be able to stabilize our own countries first. And work in tandem, but we need to have a pulse on how to bring stability at home. Ultimately, stability comes to a nation when authentic leaders genuinely listen, care, and serve the people. We live in a time when political polarization and economic collapse are shaking nations and causing drastic upsets in systems. I won't list the countries, but I think you know what I'm talking about. My recent studies on national security illustrate that when people are repeatedly disillusioned by corruption, broken promises, self-serving leadership, and feel trapped with imminent threat looming over their financial stability and safety, they will eventually react. But there is peace when a nation's leaders serve the people with responsibility, integrity, and make efforts to fix problems rather than just giving platitudes. So in talking about a pathway to peace and restoration, that's just a list I came up with of different things where we need to look at things in a different paradigm. So this isn't on there, all of it isn't on there, but I'm going to try to get through as much as I can. So in order to effectively explore pathways to peace, we need to examine peace in a paradigm that identifies the components of peace as a continuum. It's not a static state, it's a continuum that has its own life. We need to accept the fact that conflict is a part of life in an imperfect world with imperfect people. And it becomes a greater problem when there is negligence, undue postponement, disinterest in resolution, or a lack of transparency and commitment to work through the conflict. And rather than viewing peace as an absence of conflict and setting unrealistic expectations, we need to focus on the capacity to resolve conflict and soberly determine if two entities are really ready to undergo a peacemaking process, and then find common ground to set goals and build a peacemaking strategy. Ultimately, the capacity for conflict resolution occurs when both entities realize that there is greater benefit to resolution than continuing in conflict. We do not resolve conflict by merely dealing with the symptoms. We resolve conflict as we work towards building mutual trust that creates a passage to the root of the problem. You need trust to get to the root of the problem together. Peace is ever moving and ever evolving because at some point, even after conflict is resolved, another will eventually pop up. Peace should therefore be viewed as an organic continuum that requires ongoing trust building and conflict resolution as you would in any personal relationship. So my premise really is that politics and what happens in the world is a macrocosm of the microcosm of the home of the individual. Trust is a delicate matter, and if there's any time that political agendas and selfish ambitions need to be set aside, it is in the peacemaking process. Otherwise, there's a risk of widening the chasm. And benchmarks and accountability mechanisms can help gauge the effectiveness of a process and compel both entities to stand by their commitment. This is sort of a tough reality to come to terms with because we're emotional people. And we want to have goodwill and hope, but peace is not a sentimental dream. It's actually an objective process that requires disciplined emotions and moral courage. There's a lot of tough decisions that have to be made and thought through when you're talking about peace. So I have there true peace versus false peace. You can fool the people with platitudes and tokenism, but you can't cheat peace. It has a mind and life of its own. Peace will not flow unless there are genuine and mutual efforts for resolution and reconciliation. And there's only true peace or an illusion of peace. Appeasement is not a pathway to peace. Fear-driven compromises aren't part of a peace process. Appeasement often hampers a true resolution process from taking place because it reinforces aggressive behavior. And as long as aggression produces beneficial outcomes for the aggressor, there is no urgency for aggression to stop. Oppression versus freedom. Fear installed by oppression is a powerful motivator, but it is unstable. Rather instills resistance over time, and at some point the people choose to die fighting rather than rot in captivity, so they revolt. Then the oppressor uses greater force to shut down resistance, so there's no peace under oppression. And where there is no peace, prosperity is hampered. And there's a theft of destiny where oppression takes place for both the oppressed and the oppressor. Freedom in a democratic society allows diversity to exist, and the capacity to make decisions for one's own life is vital to the human condition and allows an individual to soar into the realm of self-actualization. Freedom is significant for peace to flow, and where peace flows, the ground is fertile for prosperity. So when politicians lead with care and empower the people rather than oppress them, the people's positive well-being, gratitude, and patriotism cause them to bear greater outcomes for their country. So on the topic of individual freedom versus freedom for all, I brought this up because there's a lot of, in the Western world today of fighting for this human right or that human right, and sometimes people feel that there's an infringement on their own rights. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to try to skip through it. Basically, in a nutshell, what I want to mention here is that democracy is messy, it's complicated because the human condition is messy and diversity is complicated, but it's not a problem to be fixed. And it's just a reality we should learn to navigate with thoughtfulness and respect, accepting that not everyone will agree with you and vice versa. I only have like 20 seconds left, so I'm going to jump over to the higher calling part. And we could talk, we could talk more about things off the line and etc. later on. I just am so encouraged by the messages that I heard today throughout this week and the individual conversations I've had with you and many of us here are trailblazers. We are the first in our countries, or the second or third. We are really in the grassroots beginning of having a voice as overseas Korean diaspora in our countries. But so we're very fresh, and we can be in this place of trailblazing. We can actually start changing the paradigms around us by doing things differently than what the status quo is. We have all been on the receiving end at some point in our political journey of slander, betrayal, and vitriol. And the biggest lie humanity has ever believed is that the end justifies the means and that politics is a blood sport. Politics is toxic because people have accepted that politics is dirty. Politics should hold the golden standard, as politicians are the leaders in whose hands flow life, prosperity, justice, and freedom, yet why do we make exceptions for them and expect them to be different? During a meeting about domestic violence, when I was doing my term on the Status of Women's Committee, I asked a woman who was one of the witnesses, how do you end domestic violence? And her answer was, you first begin by not abusing each other in the House of Commons during question period. That was a very, very profound statement. And so we cannot expect peace to come when we ourselves are contributing to a culture of abuse. We must counter this toxic culture with a spirit of honor. Our focus must always be on serving the people and doing it the right way. Anything less is unacceptable. We need to raise the bar. The world is hungry for leaders who love people, serve dutifully, and walk with integrity. As you enjoy your visit to Korea, I hope you will reconnect with your Korean roots and go back with more tools to bless the people you serve to shine their best. And I hope we will meet again after this forum as agents of peace, healing, and restoration at the world's decision-making tables. May God bless you. May God bless Korea by bringing peace. May He bless your people, the people that we serve. Thank you.